Um, so, well, speaking of God's faithfulness, we've seen. I mean, this song has been sung for generations, and people can testify to His faithfulness, always looking ahead to the future. But sometimes we just want to know the future for ourselves. I think that's part of the human condition, is we want to look ahead and know what's coming. But we also are not very good at predicting it. So a couple of examples of that down through history. Back in 1800, Dr. Dionysius Larder said, rail travel at high speed is not possible because passengers unable to breathe would die of asphyxia. Science, But now, in his defense, he didn't specify what high speed he meant. So, light speed, maybe that's true. I don't know. Another prediction that went a little wrong came from Western Union. In a memo, they said, this, quote, telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. In 1966, the sci-fi writer Arthur C. Clarke was imagining what housing was going to be like in the future, and he said the house of the future would have no roots tying it to the ground. The autonomous home could therefore move or be moved to anywhere on Earth at the owner's whim. I mean, people can barely drive, let alone fly a house. I just don't think that's probably in the cards. In 1977, Ken Olsen, president of Digital Equipment Corporation, said there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. Wouldn't it have been nice? Yes, exactly. If only that were true. And then in 1996, when J.K. Rowling was shopping Harry Potter to different publishers, one of them said to her, children just aren't interested in witches and wizards anymore. Probably not going to sell very many copies. So sometimes we don't exactly get it right. But we like to look ahead and we like to know what's coming. And I remember back in the beginning of 2020, pre-pandemic, looking at where New Day was at and what was going on, we could see some different trends and things in our demographics and what was happening. And so really trying to catch a vision for what God was doing with the church, where He was taking us. And I just couldn't see it. And I was angsty about it. I was really feeling like I needed to have an idea of where we were going, that we needed to be able to set some direction, and I was struggling around it. And I had this dream in the early part of the year that I was driving down this road, and it was a complete blizzard whiteout. Isn't it crazy that I have a picture of my dream? But it was almost exactly like this, where I absolutely could not see anything at all, not just a little snow. It was completely white. And I heard a voice in my head, and I equated it with God's voice saying, pull off to the side of the road. And I did that and immediately woke up, and I felt at the time like that was God giving me permission to put this search for the next thing on pause, to kind of wait. And then within days of that, the shutdown happened with the pandemic. And then, for the last 18 plus months, nobody's been really able to do any kind of planning or looking ahead to the future. And I wanted to take a moment just right here, a little turn and talk to somebody just right around you, next to you, if there is somebody near you, about the question, what has been one thing that has been hard to plan in the last 18 months? So you only need to pick one thing, but just turn to somebody and tell them what comes to mind for you, what has been hard to plan. So, what's What did you hear or what did you say? What was something that came to mind for you or the person you talked to? If you want to share theirs instead. What's been hard to plan? Travel, yes, for sure. Sorry, what? Ministry, yes, for sure. I mean, I especially think for youth group, that was crazy, trying to figure out how to do things online or somewhere else. Or
Planning a celebration of life or memorial service.
yes, absolutely.
Just friends and family in general, and what can you do safely?
Right, yeah. And everybody has a different idea of what safe looks like. So trying to plan things, get together. Yeah, just on and on, I've talked to people about shipping and how that's hard, or searching for a job, all kinds of things. I was talking with somebody a few weeks back, and they were just talking about their life in general. They were the ones who said to me, I feel like I just can't even see 2 feet out. And I could relate to that and resonate with that so much. And I've been thinking about this quote from Eric Hoffer that's one of my favorites, where he said, "The most gifted of the human species are at their creative best when they cannot have their own way." Well, that kind of puts it out there that you better be at your creative best if you want to be considered part of the most gifted. But thinking about that in terms of right now and going, okay, what if we just kind of let go of this idea of trying so hard to figure it all out? And what if instead seeing 2 feet out is a gift rather than a hindrance? What if being brought down to this small outlook is actually of the Lord and not something that we have to fight so hard to overcome? What could that mean for us? And I like that. That felt empowering to go, no, you know what? We can focus on these next 2 feet. There is something for us right here. And so that's kind of how this series idea began to germinate for me. And I thought, really, you can think of 2 feet in a lot of different directions, little quadrants. I think you can think of 2 feet in terms of relationships, the people who are closest to you. We've talked a few times during the pandemic about neighbors and the opportunities that have arisen there that weren't there before. Family, a lot of stuff comes up with family when you've been trapped with them for days on end. Your activity that you have to do each day, whether that's your job or school or household chores, whatever is just right in front of you to do. And of course, there's a mirror in front of you too. And so you're looking at yourself and you're going, yeah, there's probably some work there. some spiritual growth that needs to happen. Anytime we're in this kind of pressure cooker situation, stuff bubbles up and you go, oh, I don't really like that about myself, and begin to see some things that maybe need some self-care. There's a good workshop coming up tomorrow night, I hear, if you want to be part of that. But it's just an opportunity to look inward as well. And then, the moments, I would say, are the interruptions, the things that we didn't plan for that just show up right here, that are plopped in our lap and we have to deal with because they're coming up. And so all of those happen within that 2 feet realm. But I'm curious for you, as you think about not being able to see more than 2 feet out, is there anything not included in those quadrants that you go, oh, this is really pressing on me right now? Or one of those that you really resonate with? Because what I want is to make sure this series is still in formulation as we're going along through it. And what I want to make sure is that it's really actually speaking to where we're at. I've been looking at this old book. It's now almost 30 years old, that was written by a professor that I had in seminary. It was a lot newer book back then. But it's called Redeeming the Routines. And he makes this comment in the book. He says, our everyday concerns receive little attention in the church. And it seems like we can have these spiritual conversations that don't really ever land, don't get grounded in what we're actually dealing with. So I would encourage you, I would invite you as we are going through this, if there's something that you think applies or fits within this conversation, please reach out and call me, email me, whatever. I'd love to hear that and make sure that what we're talking about actually speaks to where you're living and the 2 feet that are in front of you right now. I thought as we are embarking on this that James would be a good spot for us to kind of use as our backdrop. And sometimes I don't like to go to James. James can be pretty cut and dry, black and white kind of guy. And sometimes I like a little more nuance to things. But I think when it comes to practicality and when it comes to being a man of action, James is our guy. And I think we will find him to be a really significant ally as we are embarking on this, because he's thought of a lot of it through. Scholars look at the book of James and think that it may actually have been like transcripts of written sermons first, because when you read through it, it has this cadence to it that sounds like it's being spoken to a group. And it's interesting to think about that. But as we are diving into James, I'm not necessarily going to approach it like I would a normal book study. We're not going to necessarily sequence it that way. In fact, today I want to jump into James chapter 4 as we're beginning this, because he sort of addresses this internal desire that we have as human beings to know what's happening in the future. So here's what he says. He says, now listen. Already he's being a little salty here. Now listen. You who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Wait, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist, a vapor, he says, that appears for a little while and then vanishes. I know some of you were paying attention to William Shatner going up into space recently. And, it seemed a little gimmicky that here you have the Captain Kirk at 90, finally getting to go into space. But if you heard any of his interview afterwards, he was so moved emotionally by the whole thing. And what he kept talking about was going through this rush of blue, is just whizzing past, and then blackness. And he said, what is that? Is that death? And granted, being at the stage of life that he's at, of course he's thinking about the fleeting nature of life, but that was what stuck with him. And James is saying, look, you're like the steam from a coffee cup. It's gone really quickly. And that's not to downgrade its importance. That's just saying it's so fleeting. Life goes by so quickly. So he says, because of that, instead of making all these really concrete, like locked in plans, instead he says, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So you can hear that James is just kind of calling things out as they are. But as I was looking at what he's saying about this and thinking about what he is pushing against in that tendency, that presumption that we have, that we know what's coming, I thought, well, wow, we're in this unique place where that is almost being taken away from us. Even if we want to do that, we can't really do that. We've been limited in how far out we can look. And so thinking about, if I can accept that limited vision if I can come to terms with that and see it as a gift instead of a hindrance, what would that mean for me? And I think looking at what James has to say about this, we can see a few things that show up. First of all, it frees me from the illusion of control. It really isn't that it's taking control away from me. It's just getting rid of the idea that I have in my head that I'm in control. Because that's really what we want most of the time, to feel okay about the world. There's a pastor we used to have years ago, and I really don't remember much of anything from his sermons except this one line that he would say regularly, which is, the real issue is never the real issue. The real issue is always control. That is always the thing that we are struggling with and wanting more of. And James says we don't have control over the amount of time that we have. You know, you don't know if you've got an hour or a day or a year, so we need to hold that loosely. It's not that we can't plan and have ideas of what we'd like to do, but to acknowledge the fact that that's not really in our control. And then also our fortunes. You know, they were planning on this business venture in his illustration that is basically going to set up the security for what things look like for them going. And he's like, there's so many things that can happen that you can't just be counting on your ability to have a strategy for life. I was talking this week with Thomas Anderson Jr. Some of you may remember a pastor from Spokane who we had speak in to on our videos a couple times in the last year. He and his family just moved to Chicago, where he was asked to be the pastor of one of the Willow Creek campuses there. And it was really this great opportunity that just sort of fell in his lap, and it aligned with everything that he was wanting to do in terms of more urban ministry, and just seemed like God was mapping out this direct, straightforward path. So he's back there now. They got there, and just a few weeks after getting there, the apartment building where they were living had a fire, and the sprinklers went off in their apartment, and they lost 90% of their belongings. And then after that, he got sick, and then his kids have been having a hard time with school, and so all these things that just have not gone according to plan. And I was just impressed by his ability to just roll with the punches of what God was doing, and it was because he was acknowledging what James had said, that we cannot just cling so tightly to what we think life needs to look like. And if we can let go of some of that, that's really a gift to us, because it frees us from something that wasn't ours in the first place in terms of control. A second thing that I think accepting my limited vision gives me is it lets me stay in the present. Anybody else have a hard time staying in the present? I mean, that's kind of also part of just human nature. Clear back in the 1600s, Blaise Pascal said, "If we examine our thoughts, we shall find them always occupied with the past and the future." It's kind of comforting, isn't it? You know, it's been going on for a long time. It's really hard for us to stay right here and right now. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because when we're right here, that means we've got to pay attention to the pain that we're feeling. What's actually going on in our relationships? What we have to face and deal with. And so we'd always rather escape somewhere to the past or the future. So the present's hard. But the present is also such a gift for us. I was thinking about back in Exodus, where God meets Moses in the burning bush, and he wants him to go and lead his people out of Egypt. And so what does he tell Moses? When Moses says, "What am I going to tell people who sent me?" What does he tell him to say? Anybody remember? I am. Yeah. That's God's self-designation, his most boiled down description of who he is. I am. He is the eternal present tense God is always right in the present, and it's in the present where we are going to encounter him, where we're going to connect with him and find him. He's not living in our imagined fantasy about what the future is going to look like. Our chances of having something really significant and meaningful with God in that realm is slim. Or our revised version of what happened in the past. That's not where God is either. He's right in the present moment, and he invites us to meet him here. And the present is where we're most likely to see him. And it's as we press into what is present that's going to have the greatest impact on where we're going. So rather than spending all our time fretting and being frustrated over not trying to see tomorrow, if we start to really begin to deal with what is right here and right now, that's going to have a greater shaping influence on where we're going. I like what Catherine Booth said. She said, there is no improving the future without disturbing the present. Without disturbing the present. So I want to just pause right there for a moment. Any thoughts on that so far? Any thoughts on being present or control? Yeah, Marie.
Well, earlier when you had that quadrant image set up,
Mm-hmm.
the things that came to my mind was why it's so hard is all of these things are colliding, it seems like, at the same time.
Yes.
That's very connected to living in the future.
Yes. That is really true. All those quadrants that we showed, it's not like you can just deal with one individually. They're all combining at once, which does make the present particularly intense then. Yeah. That's a good point.
One thing, if you live in the present, you have more energy than you would if, like me, worried about the future.
Sure. Yes.
So I'm overwhelming myself when I need my energy for right now.
Yes. Yes. We spend a lot of energy worrying about the future that would be better applied to the present moment. Becky, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that I'm planning on retiring in a few months, and the response from people is, oh, I bet you're just counting the days. And I go, no,
Huh.
no, I'm living in each precious moment. I'm not, I can't do that. And, I think most people, because, and it is wanting, I do want to think about that.
Yes.
But I'm just in love with today and thankful for what we have. And so I'm trying to keep my eyes on this moment.
That's so good. I am so impressed. She said she just loves today and loves being in the moment. And I want to be more like you. That's good. Because it is so easy to once you get. I'm such a future thinker that I can just live there all the time, and then it just totally takes you out of whatever is going on, and then it's gone. And so it's not that James is anti-planning, because we all have to give some degree of thought to the future. But yeah, Karen.
I was just going to say, Jeff, I love you so much. And also, those are like some of my least favorite verses.
Right. Yes.
So I almost had a physical reaction because as a pastor's daughter growing up in the church, the line, if you know what good you should do and don't do it, it's a sin. Well, I'm a recovering people pleaser, anyone.
Yeah.
And so I can wake up and think of all these things I should do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the things we don't talk about in church.
Yeah.
So I have this list, and then it's magical thinking that I
Right.
could get any of them done.
Sure.
And so what I am really grateful for is that I'm learning that 2 feet out is such a gift, and really it's about can I love 2 feet out?
Yeah.
Am I withholding love 2 feet out?
Yes.
Am I asking for forgiveness 2 feet out?
Yes.
Because it's a different kind of magical thinking to imagine that I can big things for God.
Right.
I grew up with a steady diet of, you're going to do great things for God. Don't ever tell that to anybody. It is a
Yes.
terrible burden.
Yes.
And so the gift of that
Yep.
is helpful.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we will come back to that verse that she mentioned in a little bit. But I think that's really important. And because when we get that word ought out there, that's also kind of a future-y word sometimes, of expectations of things, even of ourselves. And when we can live there. And that can also be a place that takes us out of what is right here. I really like something that Drew said years ago about, and I can't remember the exact wording now, but you talked about not necessarily wanting your daughters to be great, to become great, so much as you want them to become good. And was that how it was? Something like that. But I think that's the same thing. Like, you can have in your head big things, and that also can take us out of the very present things. Because that's what 2 feet is small, right? It's a small area, and so to bring it on back down to that. Any other thoughts before we keep moving on? This is really helpful. Yes.
I was just thinking, it's odd that this subject came up today, that a person can become very, very bitter if you think that life should be a certain way and it doesn't turn out to be that way.
Yep.
You have crisis after crisis.
Yes.
I've seen many a life destroyed, and even my own not destroyed, but the good things didn't really get to permeate
Yep.
my joy or love, because I was always thinking that things should be different, and it can destroy you. You can die of
Yes. That is really good. That is a good word. Thank you for that. Yeah. Expectations. It's fun to dream, but then when dreams don't happen, that can lead us to in a different direction. Okay. Well, so if we can accept our limits, our limited ability to see ahead, it can keep us in the present. And then also it brings this issue of will into focus. Because what was it James said? He said, instead of getting all about your plan for the future, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. And he's not like creating a formula here that you're supposed to say that every time. That also gets back to the idea of magical thinking about things. It's not formula. It's having this attitude in your mind, adopting this stance when you're making your plans, that you're bringing it underneath God's will. And this to me is what I would call garden work, because it really just reminds me of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I feel like more and more as I go through life, that garden scene seems just so deeply profound and what happened there. And you think about Christ entering into the humanity of this idea of not being able to see fully what's coming. And this gets a little messy because we have Jesus as God and Jesus as human, but he had already told his disciples that there were certain things about the future that only the Father knew, and not even the Son. And there are aspects of what lies ahead for him when he's in the garden, as he's thinking about his death and his trial and the pain and suffering that lie ahead, that he cannot know ahead of time, because you cannot know the experience until you've gone through it. And so there is this certain bit about his future that is dark to him. And if that were me, I know how I am about big things that are dreadful coming up, that are unknown. I just spin around them. You know, I want to think it through 360 and have everything planned out and locked down as far as I can. And he can't do that, but he's not just spinning around it. Instead, he is saying, look, what I want, humanly speaking, I don't want to die. But what I want more than anything is for my Father's will. And so he lays down his human will and says, God, your will be done in this situation. And I think of that for us, and I think that's how to take everything that we have and just bring it to God and say, here's what I want, here's my heart, but what I want most is to want your will. And so I'm going to lay this before you and leave it there. And I think this also gives us this gift of being able to commune with Christ in a new way. As we are doing that and understanding that he understands our situation, he knows what it's like to be in the dark and can relate to us in that way. It gives us a greater appreciation for what he has done on our behalf already. So it is this gift of Jesus in the middle of this, if we can bring our will to God. Well, one last thing that I think that accepting my limited vision does is it calls for concrete obedience. And this gets to that verse that Karin was saying should be stricken from the record. But it says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's sin for them. First, I want to talk about what James has just said we don't know that we ought to do, and that's the future, right? We don't know what's coming. We don't know how much time we have. We don't know what our fortunes are going to be. So that to not do what we don't know, that's not sin. So we're not responsible for this future that we can't make happen. But the things that we do know, those are things that are right here present. And so it gets us out of this more abstract idea of worrying about what God is asking of us and instead going, well, what's 2 feet out from me that I know? It gets it really specific and concrete because there is always something right here in front of us. At least almost always. I think as I look at the course of the pandemic, there have been multiple times where I couldn't see very far, but almost always God gave me something next to focus on and to go, okay, right now, today, it felt like every single day was its, and it continues to feel like every single day is its own battle in a new way where it just is bringing everything down to expectations to that moment. And I think that even when I can't see the entire path, I can almost always see the next step. There's almost always a next thing. And it makes me think of that quote, and I can't remember who said it, but wanderer, there is no road. The path is made by walking. And I think for New Day, we are entering this new season of trusting God and following him in new ways that is going to be less about casting a big vision for our church and more about listening to him step by step in the moment, just like we sang this morning, even that we are discovering it as we go. We are finding it on our way. We are leaning into obedience. And there is always an obedience right in front of us. So you think about that and you go, what is most on my heart right now? What can I feel God speaking to me about? Is there an action step for me in that? What am I feeling right now? Maybe I'm stressed or fearful or tense or excited. What's the general, or even the physical feeling? Getting in touch with actually is going on in your tight shoulders or your nervous gut or whatever. And what's that about? Being curious about that. What's right in front of me, or who is right in front of me? Who is the person who I'm talking to who, if I just ask one more question, they're going to share something that is a deep burden for them that I can go, okay, they need prayer. If nothing else, I can pray for somebody right now. That is one of my most important action steps in the moment. What is that right out there? What is it that I'm holding? What has God given me that is a resource for me to work with right now? Maybe it's my experiences that I've been through when I'm talking to somebody else that's going through a hard time. Maybe it's my finances. Maybe it's my time. Maybe it's my talents. But what is it that I have that I know is something that's a gift from God right now that I could share with somebody? And finally, what can I just lay down? What are the expectations? Maybe that's the step for me at the moment, is to just simply say, okay, I'm going to stop the spinning and fretting and constant grasping for a future that I can't actually control. And I'm going to leave that with God and say, your will be done. I'll leave you with this quote from George MacDonald that I think is really good. He said, when we're not able to see what God is doing, he said, then fold the arms of your faith and wait in quietness until light comes on in your darkness. Fold the arms of your faith, I say, but not of action. Think to yourself of something you ought to do and go and do it, if it be but the sweeping of a room or the preparing of a meal or a visit to a friend. Heed not your feelings. Do your work. New Day, we have work ahead of us. We have work that is right in front of us right now. I was talking with Becky earlier in the week and just talking about how many people are struggling right now who don't know the hope of Jesus. And he's put all of you in all of their lives. There are people all around us. There's great work to do, and we don't have to look very far ahead. And we can know that God is right here with us right now. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you that our lives are fleeting, and the reminder of that because they are so fleeting, they're also small. God, forgive us for the expectation that you would do big things necessarily through us. If we were just living right, that life would be big. God, allow us to accept smallness, to be content to be ordinary, good, faithful servants who don't have to be orchestrating something beyond that, Lord, but to be faithful to what you've given us right here. I pray for us as a congregation, God, as we seek to be listening to you right in the moment. Help us be attentive to the right things. Free us up from unneeded guilt, unneeded burden, unneeded expectation, God, and allow us to see what an enormous gift it is to just meet you right in the present. We give it to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.